The orphan who developed Rolex. Greetings guys. You're back on our channel. Today, we'll tell you about an orphan boy who built Rolex and made it the most prestigious watch brand in the world. We will also talk about the secrets that keep the famous Rolex crown from falling. So don't move. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss anything. Let's begin. Everything about Rolex was made by its founder, Hans Wilsdorf, who was a very interesting person. He was not only a businessman whose inventions did amazing things, but he also left a mark on the world that will last forever. Hans Wilsdorf was born on March 22, 1881, in Kulmbach, Germany. When he was only 12, he lost both of his parents. He was an orphan at such a young age. So, Hans's future depended on his uncles, who sold the successful business that had belonged to his grandfather and then his father. Hans was then sent to a boarding school with his brother and sister, where he did well in math and languages. Hans's autobiography, Rolex Jubilee Vade Meekum, talks about what his uncles did for him, even though they didn't care much about him. They taught him how to be self-sufficient and take care of his things from a very young age. When he looks back, he thinks this is what made him successful. Hans lived in a time when people wore watches on their wrists or kept them in their pockets. In those days, wristwatches were called wristlets, and most women wore them. They were small and not very accurate. Men were quoted as saying that they would rather wear a skirt than a wristwatch because they thought wristwatches were too feminine. But Rolex was the first company to make watches for men to wear on their wrists. Also, watchmakers thought that people were too active for wristwatches to work. But Rolex's history shows that Wilsdorf was always looking for ways to make things better. At 19, he started working with watches, and by the time he was 24, he was amazed by how precise watch movements were and knew exactly how he could help. Even though his peers thought he was crazy, he took a chance and made a truly modern watch that met the needs of the modern world. In 1905, he started working at a Swiss watch company in Bienne, Switzerland, that made a line of unusually small watches. In the same year, he took those watches to London and had cases made for them. This let him start his own business making watches. In 1908, he came up with the name Rolex, which has an interesting story about how it came to be. Hans said, "A genie told me Rolex while I was riding on the upper deck of a horse-drawn omnibus along Cheapside in the city of London." He looked for a long time and worked hard to find the perfect name, a short word with a nice sound that was easy to say and would be easy to remember. The word Rolex looked great on a dial because it was stylish and authoritative. So, he left on the trip of his life. In 1910, the official watch rating center in Bienne, Switzerland, gave him the first certificate for the accuracy of a watch's time. After that, it got known all over the world. In 1914, the London Observatory at Kew gave him a Class A precision certificate for how well Rolex kept time. Hans Wilsdorf had already done a lot when he put so much accuracy into the small case of a wristwatch. He wasn't even 30 years old yet. When World War I started in 1914, Britain did something about it by putting a 33% tax on imports. This made Rolex move its headquarters to Bienne, Switzerland. As the company's reputation grew, Hans set up a permanent office in Geneva, which is still there today. He got the best watchmakers and engineers in Switzerland to work for him because he had a knack for getting people excited. The crown with 5 points came into use in 1931. Even now, the name Rolex is written below this symbol. This is a perfect example of Hans Wilsdorf's request that the company's employees make nothing but beautiful work. Hans Wilsdorf was a great leader who made his technicians believe they could do well even when it seemed like they couldn't. Rolex should always try to think and act in new ways. He showed everyone that they have everything they need to be strong inside themselves. Then a new, exciting time began. When the Rolex Oyster, the world's first waterproof wristwatch, came out in 1926, it was a big deal. Hans Wilsdorf was thrilled when Mercedes Gleitze became the first British woman to swim the English Channel while wearing a Rolex Oyster in 1927. She was wearing a Rolex Oyster. As the brand's first testimony, she made it possible for many other famous athletes, explorers, and artists to follow in her footsteps. Because of what they did, they became Rolex brand stars. Rolex didn't come out with the Oyster Perpetual until 1931. This was the first automatic wristwatch that the company made. It wound itself and ran on the movement of the wrist. When Rolex made the perpetual rotor, it started a new era in which its perpetual spirit would always drive it. Wilsdorf thought that every new watch should be a representative of quality. A brand's identity must show how good its work is, he said. And the work should be linked to the brand forever. Then it was time to do something good for other people. In 1945, Rolex introduced the Datejust as a way to mark its 40th anniversary. When a date window was added to the dial, the watch became the most prestigious thing in the world. Hans Wilsdorf's party for the anniversary was ruined by a personal shock. In 1944, Florence, his wife, died all of a sudden. He had found success, but the person he had traveled with was no longer there. When he was 12, he lost his parents, and when he was 63, he lost his wife. He had no children. Hans Wilsdorf wanted to make sure that his great business would be around for a long time, so he protected its culture and gave it a philanthropic focus. This made sure that Rolex would always be a good thing. Even though Han died in 1960, the company still lives by the values he taught them. They will always belong to Hans Wilsdorf. They will never die. Since Hans Wilsdorf was an orphan, the company kept going after his death as the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a private non-profit. Since then, the foundation has never told anyone about its sales, operations, or production methods, and it hasn't even paid any taxes. It is still a global marketing powerhouse brand that does good things for charity. Hans Wilsdorf didn't want his brand to be seen as a sign of wealth or fame. Instead, he wanted it to be seen as a sign of success. The watches were expensive, so you had to work hard to buy one, and when you did, it was a sign that you had done well. Today, Rolex is the #1 watch brand in the world, and its operations are the most mysterious. Rolex is the most valuable watch brand in the world. It is worth more than $7.9 billion. Rolex is a classic watch. From one decade to the next, watch models like the Day-Date, Oyster Perpetual, Datejust, Submariner, and Explorer are still easy to spot. Rolex doesn't try to make more watches by making them harder to use or changing them. It is successful because it makes good products and keeps things simple. When making Rolex, only the best materials are used. Platinum used by the company is 950 platinum that is refined in-house. In the same way, all the gold is 18K and is polished on site. Rolex's 18K pink gold is called Eve Rose, which is a special alloy made just for it. It even has its own steel, 904L oyster steel, which is resistant to corrosion and is used a lot in the aerospace industry. Cerachrome, a special ceramic that can't be scratched and doesn't change color when exposed to UV light, is on the grooves. Their machine that cuts sapphire cost more than $100 million. Every part is made in-house, including the metal cases and bracelets. Every gem in a Rolex watch is guaranteed to be perfect. Rolex is the best friend of an athlete. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay wore Rolex watches when they were the first people to climb Mount Everest in 1953. Today, Cristiano Ronaldo, David Beckham, Roger Federer, Tiger Woods, and many more are among its brand ambassadors. In 1978, Rolex was even chosen as the official timekeeper for Wimbledon. Millions of people around the world like the Rolex brand because it works well and is accurate. Do you not think it's time to upgrade your collection of watches? You should do it as soon as possible. This is the end of our video, and we want to thank you for watching until the end. Tell us in the comments what your favorite part of the video was. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel because we'll be posting a lot of great stuff soon. Many thanks.